Welcome to the Further Light Podcast, presented by Wisconsin Freemasonry, helping you accomplish your Masonic goals through education and more light. And now, I present to you Brother Chris Ludke and Worshipful Brother Pat Cholka.
Listeners, scholars, brothers, this is Brother Chris Ludke, and today I want to continue to explore the application of the working tools, a continuation of my discussion with Worshipful Brother Pat Cholka. In the last part, part one, we talked about the EA. We kind of drifted around a number of different topics. Here we're going to be dealing with the working tools in the FC and the MM, and of course drifting as only Masons can do sometimes when we're sitting here talking about these subjects. But without further ado, back
to the FC, which is a whole different ball of wax. And you have a theory, you kind of mentioned it before, about the working tools, the FC.
Yeah, being tools that we check our progress, use to check our progress against the societal norms, so to speak.
And we've already covered the square, so I don't think we have to go back there unless we need to sort of reiterate something. But then we have the plumb and the level.
Sure. So the plumb is probably my favorite, right, of the working tools, meaning it was difficult for me to figure out how to apply, and I spent a lot of time on that, and I've still struggled with it So
you're plumbing the depths.
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, I like that. That's good. That's good. I still struggle with it much to this day, but the plumb teaches us to stand up for what we believe in, right? Not to the extent where we're rocking the boat, right? If you stand up too tall, you're standing in a boat. You stand up too tall, too straight, you stand up for what you believe too much, and all of a sudden that boat becomes uneven, right? So we have to be careful, and that's where I always went awry, right? I was always too quick with my opinion, too boisterous with my opinion, and I still am to this day. The listeners can attest to that for sure. It reminds us that we have to believe in something. And I'm not talking about a belief in the supreme being here. I'm not talking about that. That's covered in the expectations or requirements to be a Mason, right? I'm not talking about that, but we have to have a belief, an ideal, something that we, some sort of signpost out there in the future that we're aiming towards, right? This is how I want to be. This is what I want to accomplish, right? I want to sell my house and I don't know, buy a condo or whatever the case may be. That's that point in the future. We have to have that. And to me, the plumb teaches me to stand up for that and believe in that and to work towards that. Yeah, it also teaches me to do the right thing and be visible in doing it. Right. The whole thing, that there's an old saying, I'm going to butcher it so bad I'm not going to try to repeat it, but that talks about your ring, right? And your ring being your reminder to yourself, not a reminder to everybody else. What should be a reminder or an indicator to everybody else that you're a good man is your behavior. And I think that the plumb reminds me of that as well, right? That, how's that saying go? Character is what you do when nobody else is watching.
Yeah.
Something to that effect.
Something like that.
And I think that's really what it is. It's telling you, stand up for what you believe in and practice that and do that thing so that you can become a living signpost, well, as a Mason, for Masonry. People will eventually say, boy, that guy's got something going on there. What's that all about?
And then the plumb is building on, in order to have something to stand for, in order to make those proper decisions, we have to use what we've gotten from the square and the compasses that give us that framework. And then hopefully we've used that to work on ourselves with the 24-inch gauge and the common gavel, thus bringing us forward to the plumb and the level, which are teaching us or reminding us of what we should be doing, reminding us of those lessons of the past.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Before we go further, it's important to point out that when you're a fellowcraft, the common gavel and 24-inch gauge don't get set down, right? It's not a completion of using those tools, moving on to the fellowcraft degree. It's evidence of mastery of those tools. It should be considered evidence that you know how to use those tools moving on to the fellowcraft degree. Does that make sense?
It does. And how important is it that we can show that? I mean, I thought that we just memorize some stuff and then we go ahead to the fellowcraft. I wasn't aware we had to apply the tools.
Well, I go back to what I said earlier, right? From the entered apprentice degree, a system of morality veiled in allegory, right? It's a system. It's a process. It doesn't happen in one foul swoop. You know, our teasing before about the master waving a magic wand and poof, you're a better man, right? Masonry doesn't have the power to make a good man better. Masonry doesn't make anything. Masons do that for themselves. Masons make other Masons. Freemasonry doesn't do that. Freemasonry gives Masons the tools to be able to do that. Does that make sense?
It
Hence,
does.
the working tools.
And so we've got the square that we've covered that teaches us, reminds us of the moral framework. We've got the plumb that reminds us of our role as Masons.
Mm-hmm.
So where does the level come in?
Well, the level is another one of those tools, like I talked about with the square, that has multiple meanings, right? First thing that a lot of people think about when they think about level is equality. And that's certainly very, very true. But it's not just equality among Masons, it's equality among all mankind, right? We should never forget that if we see somebody less fortunate than ourselves, we too were in a very similar position at one point. We may even still be there today. Some really good Masons I know of are still there today. I know some really good men that aren't Masons that have a difficult time making ends meet or what have you. Doesn't mean that I'm better than them. I'm never better than them. They're my equals. They're my human beings. We breathe the same air. We walk the same planet. They're part that we were all created by the same supreme intelligence. We're equals. I'm no better than anybody. And nobody's any better than I am in that regard. I mean, yeah, maybe we made better choices or different choices, or maybe we learned a different skill than, I'm envious of people that can work with metal, right? Because I can't work with metal. So I'm envious of people that work with metal.
I'm envious of people who can make money. I teach in the humanities.
They're better at that skill than I am, for sure. You're a better teacher than I am. But you spent a lot of time learning how to be a teacher. These guys spent a lot of time learning how to work with metal. I've spent my time doing something else, learning how to manage a quality system and all these things. It doesn't make me a better person than anybody. It makes me better at that one aspect. And that's all it does.
So it's interesting because and you don't know this at the time, for the 7 listeners out there, Pat doesn't know that I've already recorded something, a 2-part episode on Masonry and the Enlightenment. But one of the key ideas coming out of the Enlightenment is this idea that you can have a meritocracy, that someone can build themselves up in a world where you were born into a social class and you stick there. Part of the reason that you see equality and the idea of brotherhood, brothers being equal, so prominently in Masonry, is if you go back to that period and just adding historical context, this was a huge revolutionary idea that you could, in fact, improve yourself. You could potentially move up in class. You could be someone else other than who you were born as. And so I think that comes into it as well, that sort of history of, hey, everyone's equal. And the other fun one is when I teach Japanese art, some very basic stuff. We talk about the tea ceremony, which is entirely built around equality. You crawl into the tea house through a door that you can't stand up in. So whether you're a general, the emperor, or a farmer, you come in at the same level.
Interesting.
So it's interesting because I see it as something universal,
Mhm.
one of those sort of universal virtues of we should all try to be equal. And maybe it kind of, and now I'm kind of off on my own mental tangent, so bear with me. But perhaps it's more about seeing others as equal because we all sort of sit there and go, oh, that driver is horrible. Oh, they're driving a BMW. And so clearly, all these sorts of things, or they're from Illinois.
Right.
And we make those judgments. And maybe it's something along the practical application is, hey, stop judging all of these things. It takes up bandwidth that could be used for other useful ideas, other useful pursuits.
A brother and a really good friend of mine uses an analogy of two soda cans, right? You take two soda cans, and each soda can represents a person, right?
Right.
Take the soda can in your left hand, and let's say that that soda can had just gotten yelled at by his boss, right? So give it a shake. And that same soda
He has a
can maybe
boss who's yelling at a soda can. He has bigger problems than
maybe that soda can represents a person whose dog just ran away. So give that a
Right.
shake. Or maybe he's having marital problems, or maybe his kids are getting bad grades. Whatever it is, every bad thing that happens, give that soda can a shake, right? Now take those two soda cans and put them behind your back and switch hands with them and hold them out to somebody. Which can do you want to open? Which can is going to explode all over you? Do you know? By looking at the can, you don't know.
right.
There's no way of knowing. If you treat your interactions with people the same way, I think you get a lot further, right? It kind of alludes to what you were saying before. I don't know what that other driver on the road is going through today. Maybe his wife's in labor and is trying to get to the hospital. I don't know. We make an assumption that he's just a poor driver, that he's made bad life choices, whatever. We make that assumption, but we don't know that to be true. And I think masonry helps us to understand, and back to the level of, or the lesson of the level, helps us to understand that we don't know what that guy is living or that other person is living right now. We need to treat him as though he's got something going on, and if he's driving like a badass, just get out of his way. Let him do what he's got to do. Don't roll down your window. Don't flip him off. Don't curse at him under your breath. None of that stuff. Just let him do what he's got to do. We don't know what he has to do. We have to make that assumption.
So it's really control what we can control. Don't worry about what the other person is doing unless it has a direct impact.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And even then, I try not to worry about what the other I fail at this miserably, but I try not to worry about what the other person is doing unless he asks for my help, right? Unless what he's doing it for me, or we're doing it together. That's when I try to worry about that. Other than that, I just try to get out of the way and let him do what he's doing. The other, I meant we're getting,
Go ahead.
now I'm the one that's going to keep us on track. Now, how you like that? Getting back to the level, the other thing that the level does, and I think wrote about this not too long ago, is I think the level is a beautiful demonstration of balance, of the necessity for balance, right? Unless something is balanced, it cannot be level, right? We can't, it just can't be, unless you're, a flat earther, but that's a different conversation altogether too.
Yeah. Why is the Earth flat and all the rest of them aren't? That one doesn't make sense.
Yeah, I don't get it either. But at any rate, the level reminds us that through equality we achieve balance, and it isn't until you can achieve balance internally with yourself that you can't look out at the rest of the world and achieve balance as well, or view the rest of the world as being balanced, or help the rest of the world to be balanced, however you want to put it. It isn't until you achieve it yourself, and you do that by the application, in my opinion, by the application of the level.
But when we balance something, usually we're balancing it against something else, right? My image is not always I'm standing on like the middle of a teeter-totter.
Sure.
So what are we trying to balance against?
I think, again, it comes back to morality and virtue. Okay. I think we're trying to balance it against that. against what is considered morally right today. We have to remember that, right? The idea of what's morally right has changed a lot over the years, over the centuries. There are things that were considered perfectly acceptable many, many years ago that today aren't. An example I use to talk about that is back in the Old West, right? There were a lot of men that were gunfighters that were Masons. Today, we wouldn't stand for that. But back then, gunfighting was a legitimate way to make your way in society.
Or owning human beings.
I'm sorry?
Or owning human beings.
Absolutely. Those were legitimate ways to make your way in society at one time. Today, we look back at it with crystal clear vision and say, I can't believe, we ever permitted that. That would, Blazing Saddles, right? A movie made in the 1970s would never be made today. Back in the 70s, it was acceptable to make movies that way. Today, it's not. These things change over time. So the only thing that we can do is talk about, going back to morals, talk about was considered morally right today. We can't compare it to yesterday, and we can't predict tomorrow. We can only worry about what's considered morally right today.
So almost that idea of living in the present, making sure that we're not worried. The depression of the past, the anxiety of the future. We're living in that present moment. And that gives you sort of that balance imagery too, or at least it does for me. Like, hey, that present is so narrow. You have to be very careful to balance within it without, again, worrying about one side or the other.
Right. We learn from the past to live today to prepare for tomorrow.
So how does this tie into the trowel then? It's always been a really troublesome tool to me because all the rest I can kind of see, hey, you need this to put things together. But why the trowel? I mean, you spread a cement or mortar, but you don't need it. The blocks can hold themselves together. There is ashlar masonry. So why the trowel?
Well, so let's erect a building today, a cinder block building today. And let's make it an industrial building, and we lay these cinder blocks on, but we don't use any cement, right? We don't use the mortar to hold it together. And a truck driver comes in for a delivery, and maybe he hits the dock a little bit too hard. And as he's backing in, and at that point, he knocks that wall over, right? So we need that mortar to hold that wall together. While it'll stay vertical, it'll stay erect until a force is applied to it. Okay. Right. I think the application of the trowel is very similar, right? We will stay together. So the trowel, the symbolic use of the trowel, I think, as most of your listeners know, all 7 of them. Yeah. I think they all understand that cement, that spreads the cement symbolically, that binds us together. Well, first of all, it's not just us as Masons, right? It's us as the world, right? Maybe particularly us as Masons, but it's the world too. And I think in that regard, what it's telling us is that we have to I'm committed to finding the common ground with you. While you and I may differ on many, many different opinions, coincidentally, we don't differ that much, but if we were to differ on many opinions, I have a responsibility via the trowel to give you the benefit of the doubt. That's what binds us together. And you have the same responsibility to me, and that's what binds us together. It's what keeps us together. That way, the exertion of an outside force isn't going to separate us, because we've used that trowel to hold us together. A political divide wouldn't separate us then. Because I've given you the benefit of the doubt. You've given me the benefit of the doubt. You may believe in one political aspect or party, whatever you want to call it. I may believe in another. But because we've cemented our friendship with the trowel, with the cement that the trowel spreads, that external force isn't going to separate us.
And so we would apply that as well outside the fraternity.
Absolutely. We have to apply it outside the fraternity.
Looking for common ground. And the thing that comes to mind with that is dialectic, which is part of logic. It's part of the 7 liberal arts, where instead of a debate, the philosophers who were first writing about it The ancient Greeks are not having a debate to try and change each other's mind. They would lay out their arguments. The other philosopher would lay out their arguments, and then basically they just walk away from it.
Right.
And the idea was to sort of take in those ideas, synthesize them, make them part of your belief system, the parts that make sense, make them part. And so you move a little bit every time. It's sort of intellectual plasticity.
Yeah.
The idea that you should have no idea or no conception in your mind that sufficient evidence could not exist to change.
Yeah.
That's kind of where I go with it.
I agree completely. And if only we had a safe space as Masons where we could get together and have these differing opinions, but leave them there when we're done. Oh, wait, we do. We just happen to. One of the most overlooked symbols of Masonry.
Sorry, did you just compare a lodge to a safe space, Pat?
I did. That's in my opinion, that's what it's intended to be. A place to unite us, a place to give us shelter from the rest of the world, a place to leave our outside concerns outside, come in and deal with the things that we need to deal with, and disagree if we need to disagree, but cordially, of course. But leave that space and leave, just like we left everything outside of it, we leave everything that happens inside of it. And we go to fellowship, or we go have a cocktail, or whatever the case may be. And those differences or those disagreements, those small points that we differ on, isn't going to separate us, because of that cement of brotherly love. That's going to keep us together.
Yeah. No, it makes a lot of sense. And in my research on the Civil War, Masonry and the Civil War, we actually have a couple of Grand Masters standing up at annual communication saying effectively that, look, guys, there's a lot of politics. There's a lot of things going on outside the lodge. That needs to stay outside the lodge. There's a rule that we do not, or there's a reason we do not discuss politics or religion within the boundaries of the lodge room.
Right.
So that makes a lot of sense in terms of the trowel and its role trying to draw us together.
So there you have it. There's my take on the trowel.
And so are there any other working tools that aren't typically seen as working tools that you would add to that list?
There's the pencil and the skirt.
Are the other two between the pencil and the skirt? What's the skirt?
I'm not very familiar with the skirt, but as I understand it, it is a kind of a cross between a pencil and a compass, or it's a pencil on a string. But I'm not very well educated in it. I've done very, very little research on it. I know very little very little about it other than it exists.
And for listeners, this is like the chisel. These are tools that exist in other jurisdictions. There's no reason not to look at these things and understand sort of where they were going with this, maybe why they were eliminated here in the United States, because we don't see these three tools, the chisel, the skirt, the pencil, in the U.S. very often. They tend to be more European, I think. I could be
Canadian. I know the chisel is used in Canada. I don't know about the pencil and the skirt, but I think there's another is
an English one.
Is it? Okay.
I think so. Yeah.
Okay. And I know there's a jurisdiction in the U.S. that may have the chisel, but I don't even want to mention what jurisdiction I think that is, because I might be very wrong.
So the chisel, just to remind everyone, applies in the EA. It assists the gavel in shaping the stone so that we can fit into the 24-inch gauge. Mm-hmm. Where does the pencil and the skirt fit in?
I believe they both fit in other jurisdictions in the Master Mason degree, and are used to. Well, again, I'm not very well educated in either of them, Masonically speaking. So, if anything I would say would be pure speculation.
Okay. So there are other tools that are used in other jurisdictions. We can say that. We won't get into the application of them necessarily.
But I recommend everyone to investigate them at the very least and do a better job at it than I have, because again, we're expected to do so. It tells us so in our apprentice degree, right? We have to be candid and industrious inquirers.
I guess the one thing that I might add would be the lambskin, which isn't really a tool, obviously, but it is one of the major teachings that kind of come along with, because in the old postings and everything, you always talk about the square and compasses, but then you talk about the lambskin, the apron as well. Would you throw that in there, or are we looking at two totally separate categories?
No, I think that I never thought about that before, but I think that's interesting. Pardon me while I think out loud. So, operatively, an apron was used to protect the clothing of an operative mason, right? To
Right.
make sure that his clothing is
and
everything
protect
underneath
the
him,
body, because
and protect the body.
stone coming off, the reason it was a leathern apron originally, that stone chipping off can cause injury. I mean,
Sure.
not huge injury, but enough that you're gonna get marked up, you're gonna get bruises, you might get a cut. So it makes sense, the practical use of it.
So if we think about it in that regard, I guess and if we think about what we're told about the apron in the Entered Apprentice degree, it's our job to keep it pure and clean. So if we combine those two things,
so we shouldn't work. Wait, that's perfect, because if we keep the apron pure and clean, we don't have to
we don't work. Yeah, perfect. I'll call my boss
there
tomorrow.
We go.
Oh,
Secrets of masonry revealed.
So I think the apron is, in addition to a representation of masonry in and of itself, right? Being a badge of a mason, I think it also serves to protect our character, right? The lessons of the apron, I think it serves to protect our character. If we allow the apron and the things that it stands for, its righteousness, its purity, its
or perhaps a reminder to protect our character. Like the apron doesn't do it, it's reminding us to do it.
I think that is exactly right. I think it is reminds us to guard our character against external forces. Again, think of the stone as an external force coming at us, right? And operatively, that is. So it reminds us to not let these external things affect our character. I'll have to think about that a little bit. I really like that analogy, though. Thank you for letting me think out loud about that, but I never thought about it in that way before. That's interesting.
And as a guest on the podcast, I usually let you go off on something. If you have anything you want to expand on, sort of a nuance corner, is there anything you want to address that we haven't, or expand on?
So I want, if you don't mind, I'd like to talk a little bit about how this all relates to Masonic education, right?
Sure.
A lot of times, a lot of people think of Masonic education as presenting a paper, or even with the articles that we put in the journal, a discussion and picking all that up. Oftentimes, the working tools are forgotten as a topic or a potential topic for education, right? Understanding how Chris may apply the gavel is going to help me learn how to apply the gavel. Whether I necessarily can take anything specific away from his particular use, it's going to leave an impression on my mind. And having that discussion with a brother is, in a matter of speaking, is a form of Masonic education. But using that as an opportunity to pick your brother's minds is going to get you to think about things a little bit differently. And then in and of itself, you're educating yourself. The working tools being buried at the end of the degree, as I mentioned earlier, any master who's conferring a degree for the first time knows exactly what I'm talking about, right? Those working tools is the finish line. If I can just get to that finish line, I'm done. And whew, I've completed another one and I can move on with my day, right? I ask that when you're learning these working tools or that portion of the degree, do more than just commit to memory and actually learn it, understand it. If you put the time into it to think about it, you're going to find a way to apply it to your life. And the things, and Chris will be the first to tell you, the things that we talked about here are only our reflections. maybe you'll be able to take something from it and apply it to you, or maybe you're going to come up with a whole new reflection on it. But use the ritual as the base and build your interpretation off of that and figure out how to apply these working tools to your lives. After all, that is expected from each of us as a Mason.
Oh, fantastic. And yeah, it's something, the interpretation elements are something that I bring up pretty regularly around here, that we're not trying to get you to agree with us. We're trying to put out ideas to get the thoughts flowing, to get the mental juices flowing.
Absolutely.
That being said, I want to thank worshipful brother Pat Cholka for coming on today. And all that's left is to say thank you for joining me, brother Chris Libke, and the entire Further Light team on your quest to find more light in Masonry.
Are you interested in learning more about Freemasonry in Wisconsin? Visit wisconsinmasons.org to learn more about Masonry and access further educational content and more light. Once again, that address is wimasons.org. Any questions, comments, or suggestions, please email us at education@wisconsinmasons.org. And thank you for listening.